All right, welcome to Cloud on Air, live webinars from Google Cloud. We are hosting webinars every Tuesday. My name is Stephen Elliott, and today I'll be talking to you about getting started with GCP cost management. You can ask questions anytime on the platform, and we have Googlers on standby to answer them. So let's get started. So again, my name is Stephen Elliott. I'm a product manager on Google Cloud Billing, and in particular, I work with the teams who create the experience in the UI and in programmatic data export to help you understand your cloud costs. And I'm based here in Seattle, which is why I'm wearing green flannel. It's really cloudy and foggy today. The session today will be going over an introduction to cost management in the cloud. Some of you may be familiar with cost management in the cloud and already working extensively in the cloud, and some of you may be just considering a new transition to computing in the cloud, and this might be useful for you. And then I'm going to work through some basic principles of cost management on Google Cloud Platform, including billing permissions, billing reports, how to get alerts on your costs, and then finally to set up billing export and do queries and advanced dashboards on that. And to cap it all up, I'll put it in a quick demo so you can see where everything is in our cloud console, and that'll let you get started even faster. And then finally, all the questions that you ask will select the top questions, and at the end, do a live Q&A. So my goal after this webinar is that you should be able to set up your first project, your billing account, and your organization. I'd like to make sure that you understand the permissions and set up proper permissions on your project and billing accounts. I'd also like to make sure that you're aware that BigQuery billing export is an extremely important tool and that you set that up when you create your first billing account. And then finally, I want to make you familiar with billing reports so you can use that to drill down into your cloud costs. So let's get started with a definition, what we think about as cloud cost management. We like to think about cloud cost management as managing your cloud spending through effective cost monitoring, control, allocation, and optimization so that you can run your business confidently in the cloud. So what do we mean by these terms? I like to frame this with just an abstract diagram, but a story about how your computing environment costs look like when you move from traditional mode of using compute resources, capital expenditures, to a cloud-native way of using resources, operational expenditures. So in this diagram, we have a fictitious estimated future demand graph for infrastructure. And this is something that you might encounter on your financial planning team and your engineering planning team. The y-axis is cost, and the x-axis is time. And over time, we're optimistic about growth. It's a little bit cyclical, maybe by the month or by the week, and it's going up with time. So in the traditional capital expenditure model, we'd have to buy hardware or requisition hardware in advance. And typically the cycle for this is every several weeks, maybe months. And so there's a stair-stepping effect going out into the future to make sure that our installations can account for the demand that we expect to see. Now, as some of you are familiar with, this has a major downside in that if our projection is wrong, in particular if our business does too well, our infrastructure won't be able to meet it, and that would result in unserved demand. If in a customer-facing business, that results in unhappy customers. Now, the happy case is not that happy either. In the happy case, we've built more infrastructure than we need, so demand never exceeds it, but that means all of that buffer is unused capacity. It's just idle capacity, and as you know with compute, it's use it or lose it. You can't bank core hours. So when you move into the cloud, into computing with operational expenditures, all of that unused capacity immediately becomes unused capacity savings. What's more, if you happen to be wrong about your forecast, that's not a big problem. Google Cloud gives you flexible access to the resources you need, and so you can start to spin up those resources on demand to meet the unexpected demand or the new use cases that you hadn't planned for. But I want to talk about another nuanced benefit of being able to spin up resources on demand, and that's what I like to call accelerated time to value. So imagine your traditional organization, a team has learned that it usually takes weeks to months to get the hardware they need to run a project. Now, either they wait to run that project, they wait the weeks or months for the approval process, or in a worst case, they just become accustomed to having to wait too long or to not getting the approvals, and they never bring up those projects in the first place. So you can run in a more innovative style and also more responsive to the changing business environment by having your compute environment be in an OpEx world versus a CapEx world. Given all these benefits, why is cost management so important? Well, maybe artificial benefit of being in a legacy or on-premises world is that developers can't spend more than the VMs that are installed. They're installed, it's fixed, and so that might give you a sense of ease or predictability. In fact, 53% of customers cite costs and budgets as a major pain point, and 61% cite lack of predictability as one of the greatest cost management pain points in the cloud. So it's really important to think about how you're going to control your costs in advance of implementing cloud computing in your organization, and also to think about how you're going to optimize costs and look at your costs over time. Again, a benefit of the cloud is that you can actually respond on demand to changes in their business or the way you're doing things. In the old world, you'd have to buy the VMs, and maybe optimization is less of a concern because it's a fixed cost that you're depreciating over time. In the new world, you can identify opportunities to optimize, and 75% of customers cite optimization and IT cost management is highly important. In fact, a study by Gartner shows that customers who don't have some kind of cost optimization process will likely overspend by 40% by 2020. So this is a really important area to get out in front of and not just assume that moving to the cloud will deliver all the benefits. It's good to be deliberate and thoughtful about it. We have several different tools on Google Cloud to help you with your cost management needs. There are the visibility tools, in particular reporting, that lets you drill down immediately, see an immediate overview of your costs, what's driving them by product, SKU, project. We have accountability tools, in particular the resource hierarchy, where you can organize costs into projects, folders, and organizations and understand where all of your costs are going. We have control tools so that you can set alerts on spending thresholds or set quotas so that you can control your spending rates. And we also have intelligence tools, so tools like VM right-sizing recommendations that help you optimize your cloud spending. So I want to go through a little bit on each of these tools before I launch into the demo. Some organization and billing fundamentals that are good to know in advance is on this slide. So the center of the GCP resource organization and cost management universe is the project, and that's the green column in the center. Projects contain all of the resources you use on Google Cloud, and projects contain the costs that those resources generate. Now, if you have an organization on Google Cloud, you can create folders to contain multiple projects, and that's another way to hierarchically organize your costs that might match the way that you structure your organization, the way that you launch and release applications, the way that you have businesses across the world, or whatever is most convenient to you. And then there's the organization itself, which lets you set policies from the top down on users, user groups, and permissions. So going to the right of projects, each project needs to be paid for, and the project costs are paid for by the billing account that's attached to the project. And then finally, if you need a bottoms-up way of organizing your costs, there are labels. So you can attach labels to projects and to resources in particular so that you can understand the relationships between resources, say, within a project, if you have multiple applications within a project, or resources across projects, if you have similar applications, for example, running in different regions. So let's put this a little bit in practice through this build. If you get started on GCP, you'll have your first project. You start using it. You spin up VMs in that project, databases, maybe other resources, and you need to set up a billing account to pay for that project. When you start your second project, you can have the billing account pay for that project as well. Now, you might find yourself in a situation where you have a project for which you want to use a different billing account. This may be a rare situation, but let's say you're an international organization and you want to be able to pay for the project in a billing account based on a local payment method. You could set up another project and have another billing account pay for it. And like I mentioned, it's good to have an organization so you can organize these projects. So if you've created an organization through G Suite or Identity and Access Management, Cloud Identity, you can create folders that organize your projects in a reasonable way. So here we might say that folder 1 is all the projects that are based in North America, and I could create a second folder that would hold projects based, say, in Asia. And then finally, I mentioned that there are labels that help you do a bit more of a bottoms-up allocation of costs. So you can attach labels to each project, for example, the cost center that the project represents, and you could attach labels to each VM, for example, the environment that the VM is in. Now, billing accounts and payment methods are typically online. If you've come in through the console and the website, you would be on online billing where you're paying with your credit card. But if you have a contract with Google, you can be on an offline payment method on net terms, typically 30 days. So if you're interested in offline payments, please talk to your Google representative, and they can help you get started with that. The invoice that you will receive from Google Cloud will look something like what you see on the right here. There's information about your organization, what you owe Google, and then broken down by SKU, your costs over the past days in the billing period, typically 30 days. And it's important to note that this is just a summary of your costs by SKU. Billing reports and BigQuery Export, which I'll go into in detail later, really show you how your costs break down. So some best practices to keep in mind. First, like I mentioned, try to use a single billing account and payment profile for your cloud expenditures. All of our cost management tools are centered around the billing account. So when you create multiple billing accounts, you won't get a single overall view of all your cloud spending. You only get a view of cloud spending per billing account. And that can be a little bit cumbersome. It's vastly preferred to keep everything in one billing account if you can. Then try to use an organization. You can set it up through G Suite or Cloud Identity, and that'll help you get more control on your organization, set up more structures, policies, and permissions. And then finally, when you're setting up your organizational hierarchy, think about how you want to allocate costs in your organization. Could be by geography, environment, application, and then make sure that your project and organizational hierarchy reflect the way you want to manage costs, if that's what you choose to do. So a quick word on billing permissions. In Google Cloud, permissions can be assigned to resources, and typically these resources are in the projects that I mentioned in folders and organizations, and you can set all those permissions in the Identity and Access Management console. The billing account itself is separate and considered its own resource, and you manage permissions for the billing account in the billing console. Common roles for the billing account itself are billing account administrator. That's something that you would want your billing admins to be able to control so they can figure out how to pay for the cost in the billing account. There's billing account creators, users who are allowed to create new billing accounts to pay for new projects. And then billing account viewer, so users that are not allowed to change anything about the billing account, but they can view all the costs that roll up to that billing account. So if the billing account pays for 10 projects, billing account viewers can see the costs of those 10 projects. Now, once your organization is established, it's good to move the billing accounts into that organization, the projects into the organization, and then make sure that you're limiting or removing the billing account creator role. Permissions exist for almost all resources on Google Cloud, and one thing I want to leave you with, and hopefully you remember beyond the webinar, is just the principle of least privilege. So making sure that you're delegating control to the right users for the right resources at the right time. Now that said, here are some best practices. So first, make sure that multiple GCP billing administrators are assigned. Now this sounds like it flies in the face of principle of least privilege, but intention with principle of least privilege is making sure you don't have a single point of failure. So it's always good to have multiple people assigned so you don't just have one user who is entirely responsible for responding to important billing alerts, for example. Then at the organizational level and maybe below, consider removing or restricting the billing account creator role. As I mentioned, it can be very confusing to have multiple billing accounts. It limits your ability to control spending in your overall organization. So make sure only the people who really should be creating billing accounts have that permission. The principle of least privilege is the third that I mentioned before. And then finally, consider making sure your Google Cloud Platform billing admins are the same as your Google Payments admins so that they're receiving both cloud billing alerts and notifications, and they're receiving important payment account information. So for example, if a payment instrument fails, you would want your Google Cloud billing admins to know that, not just the people who are your Google payment admins. So here's one of the first tools we talked about in visibility, billing reports. Some key questions to keep in mind as you're going through these features are probably obvious questions, but I like to frame them because they're evergreen, whether you're doing cost management on premises or cost management in the cloud. The first question is, how much does my app cost? You could replace the word app with team, environment, but you want to know what your spending level is. The second question is, what are my cost trends? So where are my costs going? What were they in the past? What are the patterns? And what do I forecast the cost will be at current spend rates or given a new application build out? And then finally, what's behind those trends? What are the cost drivers? Are there users who are more expensive than others? Are there applications that I could optimize? Things like that. Ways to answer these questions are kind of built into our cost management tools. So we have billing reports, as I mentioned before, so you can get an overview of your trends. We have billing export, which is more detailed than billing reports. Billing reports go down to cost by day, and billing export gives you more granular cost at the every couple of hour level, and also with all the metadata, for example, the labels that you attach to resources on them. And then there are budgets and alerts, where you can set up notifications to be automatically emailed to you or programmatically sent if your spending threshold reaches a certain amount. Here's a screenshot of billing reports, and I'll be going back to this in the demo. But as you can see, it gives you an at-a-glance ability to answer the 3 questions I mentioned before. And what I'd like you to do is consider using reports and not just the invoice as a way to understand your cloud costs. We hear from a lot of customers that their organizations use the invoice PDF or the invoice CSV to analyze cloud costs, but this is a very limited way to understand costs because it's organized by SKU and totaled over the entire billing period, whereas billing reports gives you a detailed view at a glimpse of your costs and how it got there. And then second, think of building a culture and the tools of cost showback in your organization. So project owners and viewers and billing admins and billing account viewers all get access to billing reports. Make sure you encourage them to use billing reports to understand their spending. And I'll also show you later how you can create simple dashboards based on BigQuery export, so you could create some custom dashboards if you want to share with your team or people outside of your Google Cloud Platform accounts. Now, budgets and alerts, as I mentioned, are a way to set up spending alerts on spending thresholds. These can be set up at the project or billing account level. And then you can set multiple thresholds for each alert. So you could say, get notified at 50, 70, 90%. And I'll show you how you can do that in the demo. If you think about budgets and alerts, it's a lagging indicator. It's a notification that spending has exceeded a certain level. So you also want to use them in conjunction with quotas. And each service API tends to have quota limits where you can set the maximum concurrent number of resources users are allowed to use, or say throttle the number of API requests a user is allowed to make. Here's a screenshot of what budgets and alerts looks like, where you can see how you set a budget at the billing account or project level, get notified, that's the email on the right, when spending exceeds a certain level, and also configure programmatic pub/sub alerts to send to pub/sub topics that you monitor programmatically, for example, with a cloud function or a custom script that takes the appropriate response. Now, this appropriate response could be simply forwarding the pub/sub message to your Slack ops channel, where anyone on that channel can see spending alerts. Or it could be something a bit more sophisticated, but not that complicated, like shutting down resources in a sandbox project, or suspending resources, or starting to implement some throttling so the cost rate is decreased. Now, you may have also heard of a tool called spending limits. These are specific to App Engine. So to put it in context, budgets are a way to get notified of when your spending has hit certain thresholds. Quotas are a way to control your spend rate and usage rate so that if you overshoot what you expect to spend, your overshoot is controlled. And then spending limits are specific to App Engine, and what App Engine does is it will stop traffic when the spending limit is reached. So some best practices around these. First of all, if you haven't already, take advantage of the $300 free trial, and also get familiar with all the free tiers of the various services. You can see a summary of these at cloud.google.com/free. Now, if you've upgraded your account to a paid account, one budget you might set off the bat, if you're still on free trial, is a 1-cent budget after credits, so that you get notified the moment you start spending money, not just your credits, on Google Cloud. And then finally, think about the other budgets and threshold alerts you want for your billing accounts and projects, and set those up. In the demo, I'll show you how you can view all of them in one place and how easy they are to do. Now, I mentioned billing export as a place to get detailed billing data that lets you drill down further than the reporting tool. So here's a screenshot, and I'll go into a bit more detail in the demo of the information that might be available in BigQuery export to you. And you can write your own queries, custom queries, and plug in your own custom dashboards into the BigQuery table. And that's a very powerful way to build the tools of showback that I mentioned before. When you do this, you export BigQuery data to a specific project that you own and a data set in that project. And then you can plug in tools into BigQuery. And there's a host of tools, including Data Studio, which is really easy to use, that plug natively into BigQuery and can start driving charts in less than a minute. And I'll show you how. So some best practices here. Please enable BigQuery billing export on day one if you think you will ever have use for detailed billing data. Data is available from the moment it's enabled, and so it's always good to enable it sooner rather than later. And then consider creating custom dashboards based on that data. And one way to do that is to check out the billing report demo Data Studio template, which is in the cloud billing documentation. And I'll show you where that is in the demo. So let's go to the demo. Now, this is the Cloud Console homepage. Here, if you haven't set up an account already, you can see there's a try free button right here that you can click, and that'll set you up with your payment profile, billing account, and your Google Cloud account. I've already done that, so I'm just going to sign in, and I've already signed in over here. Whoops. Here we go. And so here's my demo account, and up here it says My First Project. So in the Cloud Console, you'll land on a project homepage. And here on the project homepage, I'm not paying for anything yet, so I don't see a billing card, and I'm on the free trial. So let's look around here. The first thing to get a high-level view of everything that's going on my cloud projects is to just click up there, and you can see I have a project, I have an organization, I have a folder, and I have another project. Now this is just a list of recent. A really good tool is the Resource Manager or Manage Resources. And now that I'm in Manage Resources, you can see the hierarchy. So up at the top left, that's my organization. And then I have a folder. And in my folder, I have 2 projects. And these projects contain applications that I might want to run. That's very easy if you want to create a new cost bucket to create a new project. And when you create a project, you can select it from the project selector. And now in the Identity Access Management console, which I was automatically sent to because I clicked a deep link, but if you're interested in where it is in the navigator, I am an admin. IAM is how to get here. You can see that for my first project, I am an owner of that project, that's my role, and I'm also the org administrator. And I can set other things here. I might want to give another user the ability to be a project viewer to see what's going on in the project. And so you could add a role, add another role, and then in project, add a project viewer. But I'm the owner, so I already have all the viewer permissions. You can also look at permissions that are set up at the folder level. So let's look at what's going on in the folder. So at the folder level, it looks like I'm the folder administrator, and I'm still the organization administrator. And organizations' users are allowed to create projects. Now I could add more members to the folder, and I can control permissions at the folder level if I wanted. Now finally, I can look at the organization level, and here at the organization, you'll see the users in the organization and some permissions that are general across the organization. So as I mentioned, it's useful to lock down who can create billing accounts. Here I see I've come in with a default policy of letting any user in the organization create a billing account. That's something I don't want them to be able to do. I already have that role. So I'll just go to the organization policy and delete billing account creator as something that the default user is allowed to do in my organization. And so now I'm not going to have a proliferation of billing accounts that makes it hard to manage costs. Now, that's how to manage permissions on your projects, folders, and organization. I mentioned that billing accounts are slightly different. So let's go to billing. Go to the menu, the billing console, and now in the billing console, I see that I have one billing account and that there are 2 projects associated with it. I can also look at a project pivot view and see each project and the billing account associated with it. In this case, this is not that much more useful than the first view because I don't have more than one billing account, and that's by design. So I'm going to click on the billing account that I want to view. And here you can see the result of having a free trial. I have $300 in credits remaining and 362 days to use those credits. And I also see a summary of the projects in my billing account. Now on the right is how to set permissions on the billing account. I am the billing account administrator, and if I wanted to add someone as a billing account viewer, I could easily add them here. I'm not going to do it here because I don't have another user in this organization, but let's pretend that I have a test account in my org. I could select a role, billing account viewer, and then I'd be able to add that if that were a real user. So I mentioned creating a budget that might indicate if I've started spending real money is a good thing to do. Budgets and alerts makes that very easy to do. So in this billing account, I would want to create a budget under budgets and alerts. And I could label this the getting started budget. I want it at the billing account level, not at the project level, so I see what the entire billing account is going to spend. And I'm going to set it for a specified amount, so 1 cent. And I want that to be cost after credits, so that it takes into account what the real cost is, not the cost before any credits are applied. And then here, thresholds are a little bit redundant because 50 or 90 or 100% of 1 cent when your lowest amount is 1 cent is still 1 cent. So I'm just going to have an alert for 1 cent. And I could hit save now, and I'll get an email whenever I exceed 1 cent of spending in the billing account in a given month. I also want to point you to connecting a pub subtopic, and this is what I talked about before, where you can have a notification sent to a pub subtopic by selecting a project, and in that project, you should have a pub subtopic set up where you can publish the pub sub messages to, and then you can connect subscribers through pub sub. Now, I also mentioned setting up billing export from day 1. So this is technically day 4 for my free trial account, but I haven't had any spending yet. So I can just go to billing export, and here BigQuery billing export is the one I want to choose. That's the one that has more details. The other one is a flat file of CSV and JSON with less details. And I can edit settings here, add a project that I want the export to be sent to, and then choose a BigQuery dataset in that project. And I'll show you what this looks like later. I'm not going to create a dataset in this demo. But once you choose once you have a dataset in the project, you'll be able to select that dataset with this dropdown and then export to that dataset. So let's go to a project with some real data. Here's a demo we've been running for a while, Phil's amazing application. And this has a billing card because it has a billing account set up and it has real charges. And now I can view the billing details. So here we have that screenshot you saw before with our spending levels. And this is for that project, 1 out of 9 projects of the billing account, just for this month of October. So the first thing I might want to do as a billing account admin is look at all projects in the billing account. So all projects look like they've spent $1,529 so far this month. Looks like that's a 20% increase over the same preceding number of days, and that's 23 days so far this month. And the forecasting tool says it expects I'm going to spend about $2,185 this month. Now the nice thing here is I can group by product and immediately get a sense for which products are most expensive or driving the costs. So we have Compute Engine, Cloud Storage, App Engine, BigQuery. And if I want to see how that compares over a longer period of history, I might pick a date range, for example, going back to June and seeing what things look like. So now you can start to see trends over time, the cyclicality, an event that happened back in June that was driven by BigQuery, and that's that slice here, or sorry, Cloud Storage recently and BigQuery in June. And so as you can see, just at a glance, I get an immediate sense of where my cloud costs are going. So if I go to billing export in this account, I've already set it up. You can deep link to the BigQuery export table. And now in the BigQuery export table, you can see the schema, billing account ID, service ID. You can look at our documentation for all the fields that are available here. And you can immediately query the table and recreate charts and diagrams. One thing that I want to point you to is the documentation. So I mentioned you can plug Data Studio into BigQuery export. So if you go to our cloud.google.com/billing/docs, in Analyze Your Bills, there's a section called Visualize Spend Over Time. And here, there's the Data Studio template that you can plug directly into BigQuery export. So we'll click on the billing report demo link. And that will pull up the Data Studio template. And all you have to do is copy this template. If you already have the BigQuery export table, you select that, create a report, and within less than 5 to 10 seconds, you have your own template, your own report, and you can immediately start creating graphs in this report. So you can add a new page, immediately add a new graph, and Data Studio is so simple it automatically populates it, and it's a really cool tool. So I'm going to move back to the slides to just wrap up after this demo. So here's a recap of the best practices. I'll leave this up here, and you can come back to this slide later in the video so you can see all the best practices in one place. And here's some next steps. There's an upcoming webinar series that I'll be hosting kicking off in January. There's a white paper that's a really important guidance and framework for financial governance in the cloud. There's our documentation page, and in particular, a very exciting new guide that we launched yesterday on resource organization and access management. And then there's the documentation itself, the release notes, and there are videos that myself and team members on the billing team have given at Next in San Francisco and Next in London that you can view that go into more detail about cost organization, using Data Studio and BigQuery, and on reporting and forecasting. And you should check that out at the Google link there. So stay tuned for Q&A. We'll be back in less than a minute. All right, great, and welcome back. So we have some questions from the audience, and I'll just work through these. The first question is, how can I cap how much a user, project, or billing account spends? So there's a simple answer to this, which is you want to use a combination of budgets and alerts and quotas. Strictly capping any user, project, or billing account has to be done with a lot of care, though. If you want to cap a production account, you need to think through what that really means. Do you want to turn off all resources that are driving your website, or do you want to talk to the engineers first and figure out what a safe way is to scale down? However, in a sandbox project, you might have, for example, a budget alert set up, quotas that limit how much any user can spend, and then pub/sub notifications to, for example, a cloud function that can immediately turn off the sandbox project once that user spends too much. So think about that combination of budgets and alerts, using quotas on the APIs and products that you want your users, projects, or billing accounts to use, and then maybe some kind of programmatic response, being sensitive to the needs of the application and the downsides of having a really hard or severe capping strategy. So the second question, how can I see my costs by label? This is where BigQuery Export is really, really valuable. So in BigQuery Export, one of the fields in the schema are the resource labels and the project labels. And so you can immediately start grouping by labels, for example, in the Data Studio template that I showed you. You can also write custom queries to break down, for example, costs by values of the same label key. And common use cases are cost by environment, cost by cost center, cost by application, and so forth. So BigQuery Billing Export is a really powerful way to access the labels that you're applying to your resources and projects. How do I give users the ability to see cost info? So I mentioned a little bit about permissions on resources and projects and permissions on the billing account. On projects, project owners can view costs on the project, and project viewers can as well. So they just go to billing reports. They log into the console. They can click on that billing card and go straight to the cost for their project and use reports in the same way that I did today. If you want to give a user a higher level view of a lot of different projects under the same billing account, you can make them a billing account viewer or a billing account administrator if you really want them to administer the billing account. And then they can go into the billing console and they can do things like set up budgets and alerts, set up billing export, and then also use that reporting tool across all the projects that roll up to that billing account. And again, if you follow the principle of one billing account wherever possible, all costs will roll up to the billing account, and that billing account viewer or administrator role has a really nice overview of all the spending across all projects in your organization. So the fourth question, can you share a best practice related to allocating costs? Now, this answer might frustrate you a little bit. It really does depend on how you want to allocate costs and how your organization is structured and what, for example, your financial planning and analysis procedures are. But what we found is, in general, there's a best practice of kind of thoughtfully combining the top-down organizational hierarchy, so how your organization has folders that break down costs into various projects, trying to limit usage to just one billing account so the cost management tools work across your whole organization. And then marrying that with the usage of resource labels and project labels so that with BigQuery Export, you can actually allocate costs within a project. For example, if your project has multiple applications, or allocate costs across projects. For example, if you have an application that runs in one region, in one project, and in another region, in another project. What's important to note there is the organizational hierarchy is a very strict way of allocating costs and is nice for that reason. So anything in project A, its cost is accounted for in project A, and in the folder that contains it, and in the organization that contains it. And the users don't need to do anything further to allocate costs because that's the way the structure was set up. For resource labels and project labels, like anything that requires intervention, you'll need some kind of governance method. So some people use a script when members of their organization create a new project, and that script or programmatic creation flow can attach the labels that your organization wants on every single project or resource. So think through some of the labels governance practices you want to keep in mind so that you don't have to just trust that every single developer or user will always put the right label on, because that usually doesn't happen. So the fifth question, how can resellers provide the same functions that were demonstrated today utilizing Orbiterra? So Orbiterra is a very powerful tool for resellers that helps resellers understand both the cloud cost of the cloud platform they're working with, whether it's Google Cloud or another platform, and then understand what they're charging to their customers. A lot of reporting tools are available on Orbiterra. In fact, Orbiterra has a really cool tabular reporting view that we don't support yet on Google Cloud. So overall, what we're trying to achieve is very similar functionality between Orbiterra and Google Cloud, but in some cases you'll see Orbiterra having features that work really well for resellers that we don't support yet on Google Cloud, and vice versa, where Google Cloud Billing supports features for the consumer or the end user project viewer that Orbiterra might not support yet. So I encourage you, if you see any differences there that you really care about, talk to, you can send feedback. There's a link at the end of this webinar to the billing team, and we'll make sure to answer you. So I think that's a wrap for the questions. Stay tuned for the next session. The next session is CETV, Elastifile, NFS, and GCP, and that's going to be out of Sunnyvale. Thank you.